So y'all asked me to do this to help you out with this. So I'm gonna essentially just read it to you and then give some commentary, just give you some more information. So this is kind of like a choose your own adventure slash like you make a decision on like what you would do if you were Lyndon B. Johnson, the president during the Vietnam War, or at least through most of it. So this is kind of the beginning, and so you will see a lot of that. So this is just the vocab. I'm not going to go over that really. Um, so all of that. Da, 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 da. Okay, so this is kind of the first handout, first problem. And so this is over the Tonkin Gulf incident. And so I'll kind of read this to you, and then you can follow along and then make your own decisions. I will not make your decisions because that would defeat the purpose of the assignment. But this is in 1964, almost 1965. And so in August, your LBJ and the country of Vietnam has experienced an ongoing conflict since the end of World War II. After the Vietnamese defeated the Japanese, the French moved back into the country, and that was called Indochina, if you did not know. And so Indochina kind of broke up and became Vietnam and all of that. And so the Vietnamese um, were like, they defeated the Japanese because they were on the Ally side. And then the French were like, hey, we're just going to take our colony back. And so a national group called the Viet Minh fought the French from 46 to 54, and this was one of the greatest defeats in French history. And they were finally defeated at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And so some advisors claimed the communists were trying to control the Viet Minh. And the French and Vietnamese reached a peace settlement under the Vietnam, or under which Vietnam was supposed to be temporarily divided and then reunited after a special election in 1956. So if you remember, I think it's Days of Future Past, um, and they are in France and they're having that peace agreement with France and Vietnam. It's over this in the 19 um, 50s, 19. It's like they're having this peace agreement kind of over Vietnam. And so, however, the US did not want to see Vietnam reunited because Vietnamese communist leader Ho Chi Minh, we'll get more into him later, would most likely have won that election. Therefore, the U.S. helped to create a separate South Vietnamese government. In South Vietnam, a group known as the Viet Cong is currently fighting a guerrilla war against the Southern or South Vietnamese government. The Viet Cong are communist, and they have the support of North Vietnam as well as Communist China and the Soviet Union. The U.S. has become involved in the conflict because it wants to stop the expansion of communism in containment, in the policy known as containment. We know what containment is. So during this time, the United States had 16,500 military advisors. So these are like soldiers that provided air power and artillery to the South Vietnamese army. And this was to fight the communists. And so these advisors did not initiate fighting, but they did help train the South Vietnamese troops and fight alongside them when they were attacked. And so to date, about 150 U.S. soldiers have lost their lives in the combat in Vietnam. So you have recently received reports that North Vietnamese torpedoed boats attacked, or that Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked the U.S. ship Maddox and Turner Joy in the Gulf Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam. Allegedly, two separate attacks occurred, one on August 2nd and one on August 4th. It remains unclear whether the U.S. ships were inside the North Vietnam's territorial waters. So this is closer than 12 miles from the shore, in which case the attack by North Vietnam would be legally justified during the first attack on August 2nd, or in international waters, in which case the attack would not be legally justifiable. So that means essentially like, okay, so if you're within 12 miles of if you're within 12 miles of a coast, that is kind of the area of Vietnam, or like that is their water. That is what they control. And that was during the time in 1950. I think it's changed a little bit. But if you're right outside of the line, it's international waters, and so they don't have any jurisdiction. So, sorry about that. So that was one thing. The second attack happened on August 4th, and this occurred about 60 miles offshore. But some questions exist as whether the attack actually occurred. So we didn't really know if this occurred or not, or if this was kind of staged for us to get into Vietnam officially. And so the U.S. ships were on a top secret mission to pinpoint the location of North Vietnamese radar installations. The second attack came right after South Vietnam ships bombarded two Vietnamese islands in the area as part of Operation 34A, an ongoing CIA plan under which Vietnamese troops have conducted covert military operations against North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese probably thought the U.S. destroyers were part of the attack force of 34A. Of course, this public doesn't know any of this. So the public doesn't know. They just know that these two ships were attacked, and that August 2nd that this attack was going on, and all of that. So if you play up the incident to the press, you can portray it as an act of an aggression by a communist dictator against the forces of the United States. The American public will probably be outraged and will most likely support stronger U.S. Military actions in Vietnam. So that is kind of like a thing, that is an option you could do. Or you could use the public support to get Congress to pass a resolution that the U.S. should take military action against the communists to defend freedom in South Vietnam and protect U.S. forces. The resolution could be a blank check allowing you, Lyndon B. Johnson, as commander in chief, to send combat troops into Vietnam and to bomb the North Vietnamese as well. Your advisors tell you that legally you may not need the resolution, but politically, it would be a good idea to get the support of the American people's representatives in Congress before taking strong military action. You don't want to make the mistake that President Truman made in Korea, starting military operations without congressional approval. Because again, most of this, you have to have congressional approval. And then there's another option to get Congress to declare war against North Vietnam. This would force the country to decide one way or another about what to do in Vietnam. If Congress votes for war, it will formally commit the U.S. to fighting. A formal declaration of war will more likely get the American people focused on and united behind the U.S. military effort in Vietnam. However, most of your advisors feel that while it's important to prevent the communists from taking over all of Vietnam, this situation does not warrant a declaration of war. So it's like this is just Vietnam. It's not a huge country. It would look strange for the strongest nation in the world to declare war on such a small country, especially when much of the world sees the war as an internal struggle between the Viet Cong and the South Vietnamese government, not a case of communist aggression. Your advisors also point out that North Vietnam does not pose a serious military threat to the U.S., as Japan and Germany did in World War II. The U.S. may bomb the North Vietnamese or send in combat troops for a while, but it wouldn't make sense to mobilize a full-scale war. There is another problem with asking for a declaration of war. Congress may choose to investigate the incident in the Gulf of Tonkin before taking a drastic step of declaring war. Embarrassing details may come out. For example, the public might find out that the U.S. ships were spying on North Vietnam and helping the South Vietnamese conduct raids there. People will see that you haven't been entirely honest with the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. This type of political blunder is the last thing you need with elections coming up in November. Also, suppose Congress doesn't pass the declaration of war, you'll look like a fool and you won't be able to take lesser actions such as bombing North Vietnam or sending in smaller contingent of U.S. soldiers, since Congress wouldn't be on record against military action. So you can even like slide in some troops there if Congress says no. And then, moreover, a declaration of war on Vietnam might lead China or the Soviet Union to send their troops into the war. This is exactly what China did in the Korean War when it sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers into Korea to fight against U.S. troops. The move increased American casualties and ended up prolonging the war. Many people believe the U.S. should avoid a land war in Asia if at all possible, because as history shows, it doesn't work out. And so, especially in this part of the country, because we don't want to look like France, which lost this huge war against this very lesser power of the Viet Cong, or not the Viet Cong, the Indochina forces that later become Vietnam. Another problem with declaring war is that it will probably put an end to your great society reforms, and a war will divert funds from social programs, and the attention from both Congress and the American people will be focused on Vietnam, not on domestic reforms. And so, if you remember from part 2 of the civil rights movement video I did, um, Lyndon B. Johnson was juggling the Great Society, which were these civil rights and government social programs, help the people of America get into a better place, and then while sending troops to Vietnam. And so this was this or that, and it was this hard juggling. And then no top advisor has argued that the U.S. should declare war. Not even the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which that is like the top military guy that kind of advises the president. And that is on your vocab at the top of the page or top of the packet. To most people, a declaration of war seems too dramatic for such a minor conflict. Nevertheless, proposing that Congress declare war would force the country to decide one way or the other about U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Either stay out of the conflict entirely or fight all out to victory and unite behind the war effort. And so this is, what will you do about getting congressional support for Vietnam action in Vietnam? So option 1, ask for congressional resolution in favor of military action. This will give you public support, but it won't be as drastic as a declaration of war. 2, ask for a declaration of war to unite the country behind the war effort. 3, do neither. If you make a big issue out of it, you may be forced to take military action later in Vietnam. So what I want you to do is choose one of these 3 and then answer why. Why did you choose 1, 2, or 3? So that's your first kind of major question. And so that should be a little bit of a lengthier option, or like writing. So let's go to lesson 6. And so the second handout. So the outcome. So this is what actually happened. And so this will do this and that. So President Johnson asked for and received a congressional resolution supporting military action in Vietnam. Congress voted in August to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution by a vote of 416 to 0 in the House and 82 to 2 in the Senate. The key part of the resolution said that Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to make all necessary means to repel any armed attack against the force of the United States and to prevent further aggression. So this show of congressional support gave President Johnson the authority to take any military action he felt against the North Vietnamese. So this is essentially a blank thumbs up. It's like, hey, you do what you need to do to stop that stuff in Vietnam. And so this was called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution right here. And so it was kind of based on the Gulf of Tonkin. And so that was kind of the thing. So here's a problem. So we are now at war. And so this is kind of one of those this is one of those things that it's like, okay, this is how we're going to do this. So this is in April of 65. You're still President Johnson, so you're still LBJ. And so on February 7th, the Viet Cong attacked several U.S. bases, killing 8 Americans and wounding 126 others. 3 days later, the Viet Cong guerrillas, blew up the U.S. barracks in Quin Hon, killing 23. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy was in Vietnam at the time, and he feels the U.S. must launch some sort of bombing strike in reaction to these attacks. So this is Bundy right here. U.S. advisors estimate that 34% of villages in Vietnam are under South Vietnamese government control, which is 24% are neutral, and 42% are under the Viet Cong control. The South Vietnamese government appears to be losing the war. If trends continue this way, the communists may eventually control the entire country. President Eisenhower said that if Vietnam falls to the communists, other countries in the area and throughout Southeast Asia might also fall to communism, an idea known as the domino theory. So if one country falls, they all fall, kind of like dominoes. So then there is Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara recently gave a major speech in which he made the following points. So point 1, the situation in South Vietnam has deteriorated, so it's not going well. Like right now, it sucks. The U.S. has very little reliable information on the situation. We don't know what's going on. The Viet Cong have widespread support from the Vietnamese population, so any solutions possible or proposed to remedy the situation in Vietnam must be political and economic as well as military. So we need to undercut the communist thing by like promoting the politics of America and the economy of America as well as doing military support. 4, the road ahead in Vietnam will be long, difficult, and frustrating. This is gonna suck, guys. Like, just buckle down. It's gonna suck. We're gonna get mad because we're fighting this lesser nation. And then number 5, communist China has called the U.S. a paper tiger, meaning that it looks strong but actually is not, and thinks that wars of national liberation, converting countries to communism, will work. Chinese leaders see Vietnam as a test case for these ideas. So communist China essentially just it's like, hey, you're all talk and like you don't walk the walk. Your bark is worse than your bite. So it's like we need some ice for that burn from Mao Zedong. Like Mao Zedong just laid that down, and we just kind of had to take that. And so it's like, okay, so these are the 5 things we're making. It's like this 5th one, we can't tolerate this. It's like we got to show a force of strength because we're not this paper tiger, we're an actual tiger. And so, as Katy Perry says, it's like you're going to hear me roar, and that's what Robert McNamara says. So, and then continuing on, the CIA Board of National Estimates, a board of like how much is it going to take, has stated the fall of South Vietnam to communism will damage the U.S. prestige regarding the ability to prevent the spread of communism in Asia and elsewhere. So if we lose this, people are gonna laugh at us because we're supposedly the strongest country. If we can't beat Vietnam, who can we beat? And this is gonna suck. And then the cause of other countries to become friendlier towards communism. So because we got a crack in the armor, because we lost, people's like, well, if America can't protect South Vietnam, why should we care? Like, we should be communists. And then increase the prestige of communist China and encourage the Chinese to initiate future wars of national liberation in poor countries. So it's like, okay, if they win this, China will just continue going from country to country, proving the domino theory right. So it's just like they're just going to keep on doing this. So the U.S. has bombed North Vietnam, but only a few targets and only a few times. For the most part, the attacks have succeeded, but they haven't put an end to the communist fight against the South Vietnamese government. In fact, communist attacks have increased over the past year. Your advisors have spent a great deal of time discussing a proposal to begin a full-scale bombing campaign against the North Vietnamese. So the U.S. has already used bombing campaigns in South Vietnam to support U.S. and South Vietnamese troops in combat. The Viet Cong draw most of their military support from the North Vietnamese, including equipment, training, and several thousand soldiers. You have called a meeting to make a decision. So below are your advisors, and they're giving you options on whether you should bomb North Vietnam or not. So, argument A, the National Security Council Workers Group, the NSCWG, favors bombing North Vietnam. Bombing won't cost a lot of American lives, will raise the morale of the South Vietnamese government, and might help the U.S. avoid getting drawn into a ground war with the group outlined 3 bombing options. So, option 1, reaction strikes. So, if the communists launch a major attack, the U.S. will bomb targets in North Vietnam. This will make the communists hesitant to attack. So, if you attack us, it's like if you like do a little attack, if you launch a major attack and like kind of like hit us in the knees, we'll punch you in the jaw. So, a option 2, fast full squeeze. So the U.S. should bomb all military and industrial targets in North Vietnam, including transportation. If the U.S. is going to bomb, it should go all out and quickly bring an end, bring the North Vietnamese leaders to their knees. So it's like option 2. It's like, okay, like reaction strikes, we can do that. Or 2, it's like just destroy everything, like make it impossible to conduct a war. Or 3, gradual squeeze and talk. So this is the U.S. should gradually bomb more and more military and industrial targets in North Vietnam while negotiating with the North Vietnamese leaders to persuade them to withdraw from South Vietnam. So this is like, okay, like this is a, are you done yet? No. Are you done yet? And it's like you're continuing to like up it up until they're like, no, I'm done. Stop it. Stop punching me. And so that's argument A. Argument B, most of the civilian members of the NSW, stupid dyslexia, NSCWG favor option 3, a gradual increase of bombing. They feel this option is in line with the limited objectives the U.S. has for Vietnam. Limited bombing wouldn't get the U.S. too deeply involved in the war, and it won't risk drawing China into the war. China sent a huge army in to help the North Koreans during the Korean War, and they have threatened to do the same if the U.S. heavily bombed North Vietnam. Finally, limiting bombing may encourage the North Vietnamese to negotiate, and the U.S. can threaten to intensify the bombing if they don't cooperate. So this is like, okay, so China has told us, we will North Korea you. We will just send hundreds of thousands of troops into North Vietnam if you do this. And we will just Vietnam this all over again. But if we kind of gradually do it, and just keep China at bay. It's like, okay, like they're not all out bombing, they're just kind of bombing. And then maybe we can just talk to North Korea and not talk to Big Brother China. Or not North Korea, North Vietnam. Then there is argument C. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff strongly favor option 2, which is just like all out, like we're just gonna like smack down, like just like elbow drop and just completely destroy everything you have. So they think the civilians who favor option 3 have made misguided arguments. Rather than proceed gradually, the Joint Chiefs feel the U.S. should go all out and do the job right, using all the power at its disposal to inflict whatever damage it can on the enemy. They believe that the object of war is to defeat the enemy and then negotiate from a position of strength. So this is I'm going to beat you up, and I'm going to beat you up to a pulp, and then you will do what I ask you to do. Instead of like, hey, no one in the middle of a fight's like, hey, do you want to stop this fight? Okay, no. Do you want to stop this fight now? It's like no. It's like the Joint Chiefs of Staff are like, okay, we just want to destroy everything and then negotiate. It's like shoot first, then ask questions later. Option or argument D, the recent public opinion show that 60% of Americans favor bombing specific targets like factories, bridges in North Vietnam, while 26% oppose it. So that's just like, hey, here's some information. Like Americans support bombing. And then option E, George Ball is the U.S. State Department advisor, believes bombing will not work in North Vietnam during World War II. Ball was a member of the Strategic Bombing Survey, which conducted the strategic bombing of factories, cities, and bases not currently under attack by ground forces. Had not been effective during the war. In fact, the cost and loss of airmen and planes to the country doing the bombing, as well as the economic cost of the bombing missions, was greater than the damage done. So Ball says strategic bombing won't work in Vietnam either. It didn't work in World War II. Not going to work in Vietnam. Also, bombing North Vietnam may end up providing a cause for North Vietnam to rally around and end up strengthening their will to fight. So, George Ball is saying like this didn't work in World War II with developed countries that have more factories and all this. Why would it work in Vietnam? And this might even embolden North Vietnam to actually do something worse. So then there's argument F. The State Department Policy Planning Agency submitted a summary stating that bombing North Vietnam would be disastrous. It wouldn't hurt North Vietnam that much, and it would draw the U.S. deeper into the conflict. It would increase Vietnam's dependency upon the U.S. It would turn world opinions against the U.S., and North Vietnam would likely retaliate by sending more troops into South Vietnam, and then that would intensify the war. And so it's like this bombing would not work because there's not much to bomb. And also, this would just pull us deeper into the conflict, and the world is like, why are y'all beating up North Vietnam? It's not that great. Like, you don't need to do that. And then it would strengthen North Vietnam to probably send more troops into South Vietnam, and that's the last thing you want to do in a war. Argument G, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara reported that your advisors in Saigon debated whether the U.S. should bomb North Vietnam. They recognize that the air attacks may draw China into the war and may not break the will of North Vietnamese nor reduce their ability to aid the communists in South Vietnam. However, the majority of your advisors favor air attacks anyway, since they could not come up with a better alternative. So McNamara is saying like, hey, the guys on the ground in Vietnam and Saigon in South Vietnam, they don't like this either. They think that this is going to draw China in. This isn't going to help break the will of North Vietnam, and this is not going to help at all. But the guys also don't know what else to do. Like, this is all we got. So, H, Special Intelligence Estimate Study, the SIES, reported the bombing would probably force Vietnam to end its war in South Vietnam. So this group favors the U.S. bombing of North Vietnam. Will you approve bombing campaigns against North Vietnam? And if so, which one? So reaction strikes, fast full squeeze, gradual squeeze and talks. So you can ask two of the following questions. So on your thing, write down which two questions you're going to ask. So question 1, how effective is the U.S. Air Force? Can it hit the targets it chooses? Do the North Vietnamese have an air defense system? How skilled are they at shooting down planes? Will the U.S. lose many pilots and planes? That's question 1. Question 2, what does the U.S. know about North Vietnam's will to fight, to continue fighting? Will the Viet Cong surrender or compromise if the U.S. bomb them and hurt the North Vietnamese economy? Question 3, are there many good targets such as factories in North Vietnam? 4, will China or the Soviet Union get involved in the war if the U.S. bombs North Vietnam? So you got to choose two. Choose two questions. Then we're going to see the problem. Wait. Yeah, it's 49, sorry. I was... Wait. Did I? Let me check. I forgot how long this was. No, I don't want to. Classwork. Oh, I think I put that in announcements. See, this is what you get when you don't remember. Okay, let me check on my phone. Or actually, no, I think I have it right here. Yeah, 47. So we're done. So I'll make another thing when next week comes around. So just go to 147. I thought we were gonna do this, but I forgot. No, but yeah, we'll continue this later. This is all you need to do. Just remember that you need to write down what will you do about it, and answering why. Make it a kind of at least a good sized paragraph or two on which decision you would choose for military action, and then look at the arguments again, and then ask the following two, and then also answer the question, why did you ask those questions and not the others? Okay, so that is kind of the assignment. So hopefully this will help. If you need any help, just let me know. Email me, message me on the assignment, whatever you need. Okay, so hopefully this helps. I will make another video next week. Okay, bye.